Picture this scenario for a moment. You're involved in a relationship where the other person claims to love you deeply, but they're never present when you need them most. This person doesn't return your messages, doesn't show up to the important events in your life, and when you're going through the toughest periods, they simply vanish. Without a doubt, you'd classify this person as toxic and harmful, right? However, something absolutely fascinating happens when we observe that billions of people around the world worship and revere a deity that, apparently, acts exactly this way. This is one of the greatest paradoxes of human experience. How can we love and trust something that seems absent precisely when we need it most? Think about it for a second. We live in a world where we cancel subscriptions if Netflix takes too long to load. We ghost people who don't text back within a reasonable time. We rate restaurants poorly if the service is slow. Yet somehow, we're supposed to maintain unwavering faith in a God who might not answer prayers for years, decades, or maybe never at all. But what if I told you that a political genius from the 16th century had already completely decoded this enigma? What if the answer to this apparent contradiction was far more sophisticated and strategic than we ever imagined? What if what we perceive as divine abandonment is actually the most brilliant relationship strategy ever conceived? Machiavelli, the master of divine strategy. Niccolò Machiavelli, the man who literally wrote the manual on political power, would offer us a completely revolutionary perspective on this question. This is the same guy who gave us The Prince, a book so controversial it was banned by the Catholic Church and is still studied in business schools and political science programs worldwide. While most people interpret divine absence as cruelty, or even as evidence that God doesn't exist, Machiavelli would tell us, you're analyzing this completely wrong. You're thinking like amateurs in a game played by the ultimate master. Machiavelli understood power dynamics like no one before or since. He watched kingdoms rise and fall. He saw leaders who commanded absolute loyalty and others who were overthrown by their own people. He studied what made some rulers unforgettable legends while others became footnotes in history books. Today, I'm going to share with you Machiavelli's most controversial and brilliant secret about divine power. And by the end of this journey, you'll understand why the smartest decision God ever made was to remain hidden. You'll see why what looks like divine neglect might actually be divine genius. The fundamental principle, familiarity breeds contempt. Machiavelli understood something that most people spend their entire lives without realizing. Familiarity inevitably breeds contempt. And this isn't just a pretty popular saying, it's one of the most brutal and universal truths about human psychology that governs everything from marriages to political movements. Let me paint you a picture. Think about the dynamics of your own relationships. Remember when you first met someone special. That person was mysterious, fascinating, full of surprises. Every text message sent waves of excitement through your body. Every encounter was a discovery. Every conversation revealed layers of depth you never imagined existed. They had this aura about them, this magnetism that kept you coming back for more. But what happens when you decide to live together? Suddenly, you know all of this person's habits. You know exactly how they brush their teeth, how they react when they're moody, what their most irritating quirks are. You've seen them sick with the flu, stumbling around in their underwear. You've witnessed their petty arguments with customer service representatives. You've heard them snore, seen them cry during commercials, watched them eat cereal straight from the box while standing in the kitchen at 2 a.m. And inexorably, that initial magic begins to fade. The mystery evaporates. The excitement diminishes. What once felt like discovering hidden treasure now feels like reading the same book over and over again. Machiavelli observed this same pattern with kings and political leaders throughout history. The monarchs who tried to be of the people, who made themselves too accessible, too familiar, too close to their subjects, invariably lost their power and authority. They became humanized in the eyes of their people, and once you see someone as just another human being, it becomes incredibly difficult to maintain reverence for them. Take King Louis XVI of France, for example. He was known for his accessibility and his attempts to connect with common people. He even learned locksmithing as a hobby, which his subjects initially found charming. But this accessibility ultimately contributed to his downfall. When the French Revolution came, it was easier for people to see him as just another man who could be overthrown, rather than a divinely appointed monarch who commanded absolute respect. On the other hand, leaders who maintained strategic distance, who appeared only at carefully chosen moments, who preserved an aura of mystery around themselves, managed to maintain authority and reverence for centuries. Think about figures like Elizabeth I of England, who cultivated an almost mythical persona, or even modern examples like Steve Jobs, who was notoriously private and rarely gave interviews, making every public appearance feel like a special event. The divine application: coffee with God. Now, apply this fundamental principle to the concept of divinity. Imagine, for a moment, if God showed up every morning in your kitchen to chat while you drink coffee. Hey, how was work yesterday? Oh, by the way, I'm omnipotent and omniscient. How about we talk about the meaning of life while you eat your toast? Also, I noticed you've been struggling with that presentation at work. Want me to just miracle your way through it? Be brutally honest with yourself. How long would it take before you started considering this normal? How long before you started rolling your eyes when God offered divine wisdom? How long before you started interrupting God with comments like, yeah, you already told me that before, or can we talk about this later? I'm running late for work. Picture the scenario 6 months in. God shows up for your morning coffee routine, and you're scrolling through your phone, barely listening as the creator of the universe tries to give you life advice. You might even start complaining. God, you left the toilet seat up again, or could you keep it down? I'm trying to watch the news. This is the uncomfortable truth about human nature. We simply don't value what's always available. It's a fundamental flaw in our psychological programming that affects everything from our relationships to our relationship with material possessions. Think about it in other contexts. When you first get a new car, you baby it, you're careful with it, you appreciate every drive. But after a few months, you're eating messy food in it. You might not wash it as often, and you certainly don't get that same thrill every time you turn the key. The same principle applies to relationships, jobs, even living situations. That dream apartment you fought so hard to get, after a year, you're probably complaining about the neighbors or wishing you had more space. Machiavelli knew that mystery preserves authority. The moment you completely understand someone, you automatically start seeing their flaws. You begin to question them. You start thinking you could do better in their place. You lose that sense of awe and reverence that made the relationship special in the first place. But a hidden God, a God who operates through subtle signs, through feelings you can't completely explain, through coincidences that might be miracles, or might just be chance, that God remains fascinating, that God keeps you constantly intrigued, that God preserves the most crucial element that any relationship needs to survive long-term: mystery, the psychology of intermittent reinforcement. Here's where Machiavelli's genius becomes truly impressive, and where modern psychology validates his centuries-old insights. He understood something that behavioral scientists only managed to prove in laboratory settings decades later: uncertainty doesn't weaken relationships, it strengthens them in powerful and lasting ways. There's a psychological phenomenon called intermittent reinforcement, and it's the strongest form of behavioral conditioning we know. It's more powerful than consistent rewards, more addictive than regular patterns, and more engaging than predictable outcomes. Let me explain how this works in practice. Casinos have built billion-dollar empires on this principle. Slot machines don't pay out every time you pull the lever. If they did, the excitement would disappear quickly. Instead, they pay out just often enough to keep you hopeful, but unpredictably enough to keep you engaged. The uncertainty creates a psychological tension that keeps people pulling that lever for hours. Dating apps use the same principle. If every swipe resulted in a match, and every match led to a great conversation, the apps would actually be less addictive. But the uncertainty: will this person swipe right? Will they message back? Will this lead to something meaningful? Creates a psychological hook that keeps people scrolling for hours. And according to Machiavellian logic, this is exactly how God operates. But on a spiritual and existential level, consider this question: if all your prayers were answered immediately and obviously, what would happen to faith? The answer is simple and frightening. Faith would disappear completely, because faith, by definition, requires uncertainty. The moment you know something beyond any doubt, you no longer need faith, you simply know. But here's the crucial psychological secret that Machiavelli understood intuitively: people become more engaged when they're not sure what comes next. Think about your own relationship experiences, not just romantic ones, but friendships, family relationships, even professional relationships. That person who always responds to your messages immediately, who's always available when you call, who's completely predictable in their reactions. You probably don't think about them much throughout the day. They're reliable, sure, but they don't occupy much mental real estate. You take them for granted. But that person who sometimes responds in 5 minutes, sometimes in 5 hours, who's a bit unpredictable, who keeps you guessing about their thoughts and feelings, that person lives rent-free in your mind. You find yourself checking your phone more often when you're expecting to hear from them. You analyze their messages more carefully. You invest more mental and emotional energy in the relationship. A visible God would be like the person who always responds, immediately, reliable, certainly, but also boring and totally predictable. A God you could schedule appointments with would essentially become a cosmic customer service representative. Hello, thank you for calling Divine Intervention Services. This is God speaking. How can I help you today? But a hidden God, a God who works in mysterious ways, who appears at unexpected moments, who responds in ways you didn't anticipate. That's a God who keeps you actively searching, actively wondering, actively engaged. An engagement, my friend, is the foundation of any lasting relationship, the laboratory of authenticity. Here's where Machiavelli's insight reaches truly fascinating depth, touching on questions that philosophers and theologians have wrestled with for centuries. He understood that a person's true character is only revealed when they think no one is watching. This principle is so fundamental to human psychology that we see it everywhere. Children behave differently when parents are watching versus when they think they're alone. Employees work differently when the boss is in the office versus when they're working from home. People drive differently when they see a police car in their rearview mirror. A visible God would contaminate every human action in a fundamental and irreversible way. Think about the implications of this. Every act of kindness would be performed for divine approval. Every moral choice would be tainted by the knowledge that the cosmic judge is taking notes. Every charitable act would be motivated, at least partially, by the desire to look good in front of the ultimate authority figure. People would be good, certainly, but would it be real goodness or just performance for a divine audience? Would it be authentic morality or just elaborate theater designed to impress God? Machiavelli was obsessed with authenticity in leadership. He wanted to know who people really were, not who they pretended to be. He believed that you could only truly know someone's character by observing them when they thought they were unobserved, when they felt free to act according to their genuine nature rather than according to what they thought was expected of them. This principle extends far beyond individual morality. Think about how society would function if God were visibly present and obviously intervening in human affairs. Would people choose to be honest because honesty is inherently valuable, or because they know God is watching? Would they help others because they genuinely care about human suffering, or because they want to avoid divine punishment? A hidden God creates the perfect laboratory for authentic human behavior. When you help someone and you're not sure if God is watching, that help comes from your genuine character. When you choose honesty in a situation where you could lie and get away with it, that honesty is real and pure. When you show compassion to someone who can't benefit you in return, that compassion reveals something true about who you are as a person. Think about your own life for a moment. The person you are when you think no one is watching, that's the real you. That's the person who reflects your true values, your genuine character, your authentic moral compass. The person you are when you know someone important is observing. That's performance. That's theater. That's an edited version of who you really are, carefully curated to create a specific impression. God's hiddenness removes the performance element and reveals the naked truth of human character. It creates space for genuine moral development, rather than mere compliance with divine expectations. The strategy of tactical withdrawal. Here's something most people never seriously consider, but it's central to Machiavellian thinking. What if God's absence isn't abandonment, but strategy? What if divine hiddenness is actually the most sophisticated form of love we could imagine? Machiavelli wrote extensively about the power of strategic withdrawal in political and military contexts. He understood that sometimes the strongest move a leader can make is to step back and let others prove themselves. Sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is through absence rather than presence. Think about this principle in other contexts. Sometimes true love means giving space. Sometimes strength is demonstrated through self-control and restraint. Sometimes The best way to help someone is to stop helping them and force them to develop their own capabilities. Consider the recovering addict whose family and friends finally stop enabling their addiction. In the short term, this feels cruel and abandoning. The addict might feel betrayed, angry, confused about why people who claim to love them would withdraw support. But in the long term, this withdrawal often becomes the catalyst for genuine recovery. It forces the addict to confront their problems and develop their own strength rather than relying on others to constantly rescue them from the consequences of their choices. Think about the adult child whose parents refuse to keep bailing them out of financial trouble. Initially, this might seem harsh and unloving, but this strategic withdrawal often becomes the motivation the adult child needs to develop financial responsibility, career skills, and genuine independence. Consider the romantic partner who refuses to chase someone who keeps pulling away. While it might feel like giving up on love, this strategic withdrawal often creates the space necessary for the other person to recognize what they're losing and make a genuine commitment. Reflect on the most influential people in your life. Were they those who were always hovering over you, always present, always solving your problems for you? Or were they those who appeared at crucial moments, offered profound wisdom, and then trusted you to figure things out yourself? Were they those who rescued you from every difficulty, or those who believed in your capacity to grow through challenges? A constantly present God would create spiritual dependency. Like a helicopter parent, divine micromanagement would prevent human growth and development. It would create a species of spiritual children who never developed their own moral reasoning, their own capacity for faith, their own ability to navigate ethical complexities. But a strategically hidden God forces humanity to develop its own moral muscles, its own wisdom, its own inner strength. It requires humans to wrestle with difficult questions, to make hard choices, to develop character through experience rather than through divine instruction manuals. And here's the brilliant element that Machiavelli would absolutely appreciate. Absence makes presence more meaningful. When someone who's always busy makes time for you, it feels special. When someone who rarely gives compliments says they're proud of you, it carries real weight. When someone who maintains professional distance makes a personal gesture, it has profound impact. When a hidden God reveals himself through a moment of clarity, an answered prayer, a perfectly timed coincidence, or an unexpected source of strength during a crisis, it's not just divine intervention. It's a gift that feels earned, a revelation that carries the weight of rarity. A touch of the divine that feels precious precisely because it's not commonplace. Love that requires distance. Machiavelli understood something even deeper about the nature of love and relationships. Sometimes, genuine love requires distance. Sometimes, caring about someone means staying away from them, not because you don't love them, but because you love them enough to want what's best for their development, even if that means allowing them to struggle. There's a beautiful and paradoxical truth in relationships, where the most loving thing you can do is withdraw your presence. This isn't about punishment or abandonment, it's about creating the conditions necessary for growth, independence, and authentic development. Think about the therapist who doesn't solve their patients' problems, but guides them to find their own solutions. A therapist who simply gave patients answers to all their problems might provide temporary relief, but it wouldn't create lasting healing or personal growth. The therapeutic process requires struggle, self-discovery, and the development of coping skills that can only come through personal effort and experience. Consider the teacher who doesn't give students the answers but provides the tools and guidance necessary for students to discover truth for themselves. Education that simply downloads information into passive recipients creates dependency and stifles critical thinking. But education that challenges students to wrestle with ideas, to ask questions, to discover principles through their own investigation, that creates independent thinkers and lifelong learners. Think about the parent who doesn't rescue their child from every disappointment but allows them to experience failure, learn from mistakes, and develop resilience. Overprotective parenting might feel loving in the moment, but it often produces adults who are ill-equipped to handle life's inevitable challenges and setbacks. What if God's hiddenness operates on this same principle, but on a cosmic scale? Consider what direct divine presence would actually mean in practice. We're talking about encountering infinite power, infinite knowledge, infinite love, face to face. Would your mind survive such an experience? Would your free will remain intact? Would you still be capable of genuine choice if you were constantly aware of divine presence and power. There's a reason that in most religious traditions, direct encounters with the divine are described as overwhelming, transformative, even dangerous experiences. Moses had to veil his face after encountering God because it literally glowed with residual divine energy. The disciples were terrified during the Transfiguration. Paul was temporarily blinded by his encounter with the divine. Maybe God remains hidden for the same reason you don't stare directly at the sun. Not because the sun doesn't want to be seen, but because your eyes are not equipped to handle that level of intensity without being damaged. Maybe divine hiddenness is a form of cosmic eye protection. But there's an even deeper level to this. Maybe God loves humanity enough to protect not just our physical and psychological capacity to handle divine presence, but our spiritual autonomy as well. Maybe the most loving thing an all-powerful being can do is voluntarily limit their own presence to preserve the authenticity of human choice and moral development. Modern power dynamics and the scarcity principle. What's absolutely fascinating is how Machiavelli's insights about divine hiddenness perfectly explain modern power dynamics across every area of human society. The principles he identified centuries ago are still governing how influence, authority, and attraction work today. The most successful leaders often maintain strategic mystery. They don't share every thought, don't respond to every message, don't make themselves constantly available to everyone who wants their attention. Think about the most respected CEOs, political leaders, or cultural figures. They understand that scarcity creates value. Take someone like Elon Musk. While he's active on social media, he's also notoriously unpredictable in his communications and availability. This unpredictability generates massive attention and engagement. People hang on his words precisely because they don't know when or what he'll say next. Consider how the most compelling brands operate. Apple doesn't tell you everything about their products. They hint, they suggest, they create anticipation. They let you discover features and capabilities gradually. The mystique around Apple products is carefully cultivated and maintained. They understand that explaining everything would diminish the sense of wonder and discovery that makes their products feel special. Luxury brands operate on this principle even more explicitly. The most exclusive brands are literally defined by their scarcity and inaccessibility. Hermes deliberately limits production of their most sought-after handbags. Supreme creates artificial scarcity through limited drops. These brands understand that desire is inversely related to availability. The most attractive people in terms of social dynamics aren't those posting every detail of their lives on social media. They're those who maintain some mystery, who share selectively, who leave you wanting to know more. They understand that constant availability and total transparency can actually decrease rather than increase attraction. Even in dating, the person who's a little unpredictable, who isn't always available, who maintains some independence and mystery, that person is usually the one who keeps relationships exciting for decades. The most successful long-term relationships often involve partners who maintain some degree of individual identity and mystery, even within the context of deep intimacy. This principle extends to intellectual and artistic pursuits as well. The most compelling books, movies, and songs are often those that leave something to the imagination, that require active engagement from the audience, that don't explain everything explicitly. Art that reveals all its secrets immediately often loses its power to fascinate and inspire ongoing contemplation. Somehow, we've decided that God should operate by different rules. We expect divine love to look like constant availability, immediate responses, obvious interventions, and complete transparency. But what if divine love is sophisticated enough to use the same psychological principles that make all our other relationships work? What if God understands human psychology better than we understand it ourselves?